thank you for having me here today. I must tell you that as someone who started out attending births, that this is something that I've been wanting to do for over 20 years. I wish that I could just share with OBGYNs the way that I see birth, because the doula profession was founded by physical therapists. And when it was founded by physical therapists, that means that really what we're concerned about is how do babies fit into pelvises and how do we get babies to come out of pelvises, all right? That's what we're concerned about. Dilation, I could care less. You guys are all concerned about cervixes and dilation. I'm concerned about descent, because I know if we have descent, we're going to end up with a vaginal delivery. So, we think about things from different ways. So, a little bit about me. I have my first master's degree is incomplete in small group dynamics and interpersonal communication. I came out here from California, Northern California, in the early 80s. My professors didn't feel that I was worth educating because I was just going to get pregnant and have babies. I couldn't find anybody to work on my thesis with me. So I was going to transfer to Purdue, but I didn't because I got pregnant and I had a baby, proving all of them right. All right? But then I went on to get 2 more degrees. So I had kids, I became a birth doula and an educator. So I attended births here in Madison, Beloit, southern Wisconsin for about 30 years. As part of my research, I traveled all over the country. I visited a lot of birth units, talked to a lot of doulas, a lot of nurses, and a lot of doctors. I've been trained in the PCERA, the Parent-Child Early Relational Assessment from Roseanne Clark. And part of that training is for me to look at a 10-minute video and examine it for 60 different interactional variables. So I'm going to look at that video over and over and over again and look and see what do I see about the communication between the dyad, the communication between the parent, and the communication coming from the infant. And because of that, my way of looking at human interaction is incredibly detailed and incredibly nuanced because of the training I got from Dr. Clark. And while I did that, I was also working in the labor room. I do not have a position as a professor because I have a disability. And I have a major disability, and it interferes with my ability to work full-time. So that gives me also a lot of leeway as an independent researcher because I'm not beholden to working on committees and so on and so forth. So those are just some unique things about me in the areas where I'm a content expert: pornography and relationships, female ejaculation, perinatal sexuality, doulas and labor support. What all of them have in common is oxytocin and relationship processes. All of those things. I didn't start out wanting to go into a fluid-filled, hormone-filled environment in terms of my research, but that is where, because of what interested me, that's where I ended up. My work has been featured in several other people's books, and this is one of my first books, The Heart of the Doula, which is based on my research memos about doulas' best practices. So I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes just reviewing the research on birth doula support, and then I'm going to go into what is actually going on in the laboring brain and how can we work with that better. So, what are doulas? Doulas are non-medical providers of labor support. Informational, practical, and educational support. The stuff that you are not interested in, we are very happy to help your patients solve their problems, figure out how do they get to appointments, so on and so forth. It's an ancient Greek word meaning woman of service. We provide support not only to the person who is pregnant, but also to the rest of their immediate family or friends and their immediate partners. They may also be cultural brokers, meaning that we help people work through systems of support that are available to them. There's many different accreditation organizations. There's also end-of-life doulas, there's fertility doulas, there are also full-spectrum doulas who offer abortion support when people are undergoing that procedure as well. So there's a huge expansion in terms of what the word doula means, but it's always about this top thing: practical, informational, and educational support. In looking at what is emotional support has at least 11 different components and utilizes 9 different skills. This is shown in the research. 4 of those skills are shared by labor and delivery nurses. 5 of them are unique to doulas and therapists. So doulas actually use counseling and therapy techniques during the birth experience to help our clients to work through what is happening to them. Physical physical support is not only about comfort measures and positioning, it's also about small little things. Making sure that she doesn't have to use her mouth to search for the straw, so we keep it close. It means that when you throw the blanket over somebody's foot, we make sure that all the toes are covered. Because if they're not, that's going to bother her and she's not going to be able to cope with that contraction. It means we go up and we make sure the curtain's shut. It's not open a ½ inch. Because if she knows somebody's looking at her, she's not going to be able to focus on that contraction. We know that stuff. We do all the invisible things that nobody notices unless we're not there to do them. I learned that from a rabbi's wife in Long Island during one of my interviews. We're also experts, as I mentioned, in how to get babies out of pelvises, such as when we have a client with a prodromal labor, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to put him in knee chest. Because if those contractions are not getting longer, stronger, and closer together, in our lore, that means that we have a malposition, and we need to get that baby's head out of the pelvis and give it enough room and time in order to get into a good position into that natural alignment, that well-tucked head, that synclitic, and that's going to give us a progressing labor. These are the things that I teach in the beginning doula training. I teach people how to do this. This is one of my slides, okay? So I want to explain to you that what I'm always telling doulas is what is going on with that pelvis. In fact, I'll share this with you right now. One of the reasons why when you have a patient with an epidural, you have an OP baby, is because the heaviest part of the baby's body is always going to want to turn towards gravity. And so if you have a neutral pelvis, it's going to keep your baby away. If you've got a pelvis that's over like this, you're going to have an OA baby. But when she's has an epidural, if nobody's sitting there paying attention, she's going to let her pelvis go like this, and then all of a sudden you got a baby turning like that. Okay? So what doulas do is we sit at bedside and we push this pelvis over every 3 minutes. That's how I keep from having my clients with an epidural from having an OP baby, is because I'm sitting there at bedside doing this. If you want to pay somebody to do that, we can keep you from having those horrible OP deliveries. Okay? So that's what we do. Informational support. That means I know what my clients are afraid of. I know what language they're used to. I know what things are familiar to them. So when I'm facilitating an informational interaction, I am rephrasing things using language that they understand, that isn't frightening to them, because I know what they know, and I know what they don't know, what they're ignorant about in this situation. So I'm trying to give it to them in those packages. Empowerment. Making sure that people's cultural rituals and their voices are heard during their labor and birth experience. And we're going to come back to this in a couple minutes, why this is important. And the last thing that doulas do is negotiating relationships. And this is an active thing. All the other behaviors are focused towards the laboring person. This is focused towards everybody else in the labor room. Because as the labor unfolds, as events go on, as people change, I am going to need to renegotiate who's doing what, how am I interacting with you. And that's with her intimate partner, that's with the laboring patient's family and friends, it's with their labor and delivery nurse, and I'm negotiating my labor relationship with the rest of the healthcare team, okay? Because part of the doula's role is to facilitate communication and connection between everybody in the room, okay? That's part of our role. So that's what we're doing. And we do all of that simultaneously. For example, sir, would you mind standing up? Okay. Can you just lean over and pretend to have a contraction? Thank you. May I touch you? Is that all right? Okay, so here. So it's here with you. So here. Take some deep breaths. Good. That's it. That's it. This is just what we want to see. This is just what we want to see. Doing beautifully. Your partner's just doing beautifully. Okay. So am I giving physical support? By touching. Am I giving emotional support by giving encouragement and praise? Yes. Am I negotiating my relationship with the person who's here with them? Yes, I am. I'm giving information. This is just what we want to see. This is beautiful, right? Thank you very much. So those behaviors are helpful in explaining them, in doing research with them, but when they're actually being behaved, they're going to all be done simultaneously. Does that make sense? That example, thank you very much. You didn't expect to be doing that when you walked in the door today, but there'll be more. Okay. So what this is a table summarizing work sampling tasks by nurses. Any of the, I'm happy to email you any of the references for anything I go through today. But what this actually is this a study of almost 20 years of looking at nurse sampling studies. And this is what patients expect. Patients expect that you're going to be spending 95% of, the nurse is going to be spending 95% of the time taking care of them and 5% of the time out of the room. The reality is the nurse is spending maybe 25 to 30% of her time in the room, and of that time, mostly she's doing clinical tasks. He or she is doing clinical tasks and is not doing supportive things, okay? The reason why doulas appeared on the scene was because there was a gap in the system. Now all of a sudden we had people who were saying, well, I don't want to be medicated during my labor and birth. And wow, that's not working for us to just go by ourselves. I'm going to bring my childbirth educator with me. And my childbirth educator is going to help. And then it became, well, that was when I was becoming a childbirth educator, and they said, well, people are going to ask you to go to births, so you better take an introduction to midwifery training. So I did that, which really wasn't very helpful back in the 80s. So I learned a lot from going to births, but the reason why is that the system changed, and all of a sudden there's this gap, and nurses can't do what they wanted to do or what people actually needed in order to be able to have an unmedicated labor and birth in the system. So when we're looking at the Cochrane analysis, the review here, the meta-analysis of doula studies, so 26 trials, 17 countries, 15,000 women. This is the most recent one. The support person could be a certified professional or a trained family member. They also had some people on staff at the hospital that was involved in the sampling. So, what did they find? Significantly less use of oxytocin, less use of external fetal monitors, less use of analgesia, less severe pain, shorter labors, fewer operational vaginal deliveries, so fewer vacuum extractors and forceps, fewer cesarean sections, less episiotomy, less perineal trauma. The APGARs were higher. The core pH was more normal. There was less anxiety during labor. The people who were laboring had a higher perception of control, and there were longer term, there were fewer negative maternal outcomes long term. So, wow, this is amazing, right? This is amazing. So, what the Cochrane Collaboration decided was that we can increase spontaneous vaginal deliveries, decrease use of analgesia, decrease vacuum forceps C-sections, fewer negative child experiences, shorter labor. So to me, I look at this and I go, why? 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 What am I seeing? Why? What is this? What's the mechanism at cause for this? What's happening? And this is just to show you that there are multiple studies showing that all of these things are true. So we have them happening over and over and over again. Higher self-esteem, higher rates of exclusive breastfeeding initiation, okay? My baby is more special than other babies. What's going on? So higher rates of breastfeeding, improved bonding, decreased rates of postpartum depression, increased confidence, positive maternal self-image, and positive perception of body, which is no small thing, I'll tell you as a sexuality educator. No, it's not a small thing. Once again, more clues. I'm going, what is going on? Why is this? Because I'm, of course, in the labor room. So what is the one thing in all of those studies I just showed you, the one thing, the only thing that is shown to be at cause for all of these results, and that is continuous support. That means that I may leave for 4 or 5 contractions to use the toilet, wash my hands, eat a snack bar, brush my teeth, check my phone to see if there's any emergency texts, and then I'm back in the room again. So that's continuous support. That is the only thing that gets you all of these fabulous results. So once again, for me, that's a clue. So, going on, the best results were when the person was not a member of the hospital staff, nor were they a family member. In settings where there wasn't routinely epidural analgesia, so it wasn't routinely offered. In some hospitals where there's a quota for residents, they come in and will routinely offer. I know in Milwaukee that's the frustration of some nurses over there in some teaching hospitals. But this is what they're talking about, is when the patient is free to choose and ask, rather than being pressured to use an epidural, and when the doula is available early in labor. So, what the heck is happening in all of our brains in the room Not just the laboring person and their partner and the doula, but I'm also including the nurse and the physician or midwife in there. What is happening in all of our brains? Well, if you're the Cochrane Collaboration, you say, okay, we need to use this practice for all these great reasons. If you're ACOG, you deliver a committee opinion that says we should be using more of these things that can help people meet their goals for labor by using techniques that are associated with minimal interventions and higher rates of patient satisfaction. Okay, so that's the piece about doulas. So doulas get these amazing, wonderful results. Why? That's my question. I'm the only person working on the why question, so, so thank you for having me here. Now this is often where we start. Why aren't we working with the laboring brain already? Well, it's because the profession of obstetrics and pediatrics was founded during a rather exceptional period in terms of human labor and delivery, when people were receiving a lot of medication and some mothers weren't able to take care of their babies, so they were routinely separated. And because of this, ever since then, we've been trying to prove scientifically that this exceptional separation isn't healthy, and to get back to seeing mother-baby as a unit that shouldn't be separated. If we value maximizing human potential in life, this is what you'd be receiving in medical school. Because this is what all of our evidence shows us, gets us the best results over and over and over again. But I'm not so sure that that's a value in the majority culture in the US. I'm a part of the human potential movement of the 1970s, a child of that, the brown rice, meditation, yoga type thing that happened in the country at that point in time. So I kind of grew up in a culture that valued that. And it was also one of the reasons why water birth was invented in the Soviet Union. During when we had the Iron Curtain, they were trying to maximize human potential by showing that we don't need to drug our women in labor because our women are very strong communists. So they can take ice baths, they can look at focal points, they can give birth in labor and water, and we can allow our children, their neurological development to unfold slowly. And so babies were kept underwater for 2 to 3 hours at a time. This was back in the 1980s. So what we have now is a watered-down version of water birth. But we've been trying to influence medical practices to choose ones that are more evolutionary supported, but it takes 17 years for us to have strong evidence to finally see something change, and a lot of things haven't changed, like suctioning babies after they're born. We've had great evidence for 30 years, we don't need to do that when you have a baby who's unmedicated and you have an intact perineum. We've got video after video of babies burping up mucus when they're depressed like this. But you don't learn that. So you learn to suction. And simultaneously, we've created very lucrative financial systems that work against what we now know is best for the laboring brain. And so because we have those systems in place and they're financial, and that has to do with our well-being, how we earn money in the world, that has also become a very potent reinforcer of practices. So I'd like you to turn to the people next to you and discuss what are the 5 main purposes of oxytocin. See how many you can recall. I'll give you a couple minutes for that.
The screen like you yeah, the screen is user potential recognition.
Okay, would somebody like to volunteer? What's one that you can remember? Bonding, yes. Bonding between parent and child. Another one. Milk letdown, yes. Another one. Yes, labor contractions. Good. Another one. Sexual arousal and orgasm, yes. That is something that it does, yes, yes. So I was going to say the 5th is actually attachment, okay? So it's the friendliness or the social hormone. So that means when hi, nice to meet you. We've just raised each other's oxytocin levels. 1, because we made eye contact, and 2, because we actually touched each other, okay? So, I'm not going to go through mammal theory here. So what happens when oxytocin is released? Oxytocin is released when you feel safe, and it gives you a sense of pleasure and well-being, okay? So what I'd like you to do now is shake the hands with the person next to you and have that experience. See how the energy shifted in the room? Just that juiciness of that oxytocin right there, okay? So now I'd like you to choose someone to make eye contact with in the room. So if you're not sitting close by someone, you could choose someone across the aisle or several rows away, okay? So choose someone, and I'm going to count the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of you were able to maintain eye contact for 5 seconds? Okay. Is this someone you know well? Okay, great. Because what happens to us is that we'll look at somebody for 2 seconds, 1, 2. If I look at you for 3 seconds, I have to acknowledge your humanity. And that's why when we're walking by people in the hallway, we'll look at them 1 second, 2 seconds, oh, I better look away, because otherwise I have to say hello to you. We feel that urge to acknowledge, okay? That has to do with oxytocin being transferred between the two of us, okay? So it's a very potent hormone that wants to bring us in, wants to connect us with one another, all right? So what do you recall about attachment theory? I'm going to have you talk about that with your partner. What do you recall about attachment theory, and why is it important? Okay, so what can you share with us about what you think you know or might know? I know in this group it's hard to share when you're not certain of yourself, but it's okay in front of me. So what do you think you might know about attachment theory?
Something about when infants are attached to their mothers, they feel more safe and secure when they're alone.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, yes. Something else. Okay. Attachment theory is considered to be the grand theory of human existence. It explains all relationships. It explains the level of intelligence. It explains your grades in school, the severity of mental and physical illness, how long you live your life, and what profession you choose. None of these things have seemed to be unrelated to attachment. It's measurable and it's quantifiable, and it explains much of the human experience. Okay? So what the difference is between bonding and attachment is bonding is something that parents feel towards their child. It's like turning on a light switch. And it's like, my baby! I love my baby! I want my baby! I love my baby! And people will bring their baby in close to them. They want to hold the baby in close towards their trunk. And whenever they look at their child, there's a brightness in the face. All right? And that even if they're looking at you, they're tending to their child. That is a good bonding, but that is what I as a parent feel towards my child. And it's a discrete event. Boom. We see it. Hopefully we see it in the labor room on that day or the day after. Okay? What attachment is what the relationship that the child feels towards the caregiver that is built on a series of experiences over time of being cared for. So if when I fuss, when I make a noise, does somebody pay attention to me? Do they come up to me and tend to me in a timely manner? And are they correct in what they figure out? So does somebody bother and say, what's wrong with you? What is it? And do I experience this throughout the first year of my life? Because that's when it becomes measurable, okay? At 12 and 18 months. At 18 months, you might remember Mary Ainsworth in the strange situation about evaluating how children felt about their parents, whether insecure or securely attached. So what is that relationship like? But here's what happens to us as infants, is that over time, these accumulated experiences give us an internal working model of the world. And that internal working model is based on two questions. Is the world a trustworthy place? Can I expect my needs to be met? And based on the answers to those two things, which is on the lived experience of the infant, and that begins as soon as they're capable of making memories, which is about 20 to 22 weeks gestation. So babies start making memories before they are born. The cervix is much more like a garage door when we're talking about neurological development. So it doesn't start after birth. It starts before birth. And so the answers to those questions are starting before children are even born. And we know that from the infant memory studies we're able to do, infant mental health. So the attachment system is a behavioral system based on an internal working model of the world and oneself. It's relied on in creating and maintaining relationships with humans and furred animals, such as cats and dogs. The behaviors of expressing vulnerability and giving care in response to perceiving that vulnerability in somebody else are based on the hormone oxytocin. Okay? So here we get back to what is the purpose of oxytocin, what's happening in the labor room. If I'm looking at how oxytocin affects human relationships in other contexts, why would that not be the same in the labor room where there's so much more of it? So there's the expression of vulnerability, the attachment system, okay? There's also the caregiving system. The caregiving system is learned by receiving good care and by being taught how to give good care. And how do you provide a secure base and a safe haven in labor? So this is really the key of what doulas do. And this is why continuous support matters. And this is what doulas are offering to meet people's attachment needs in labor. So this is based on my master's thesis, which I finished over 10 years ago. So, in order to provide a secure base for exploring the territory of labor, which for many people is new, and a safe haven to return to, the doula is available at all times. Okay? Perceived as available at all times. This is the perception of the laboring person. That you can meet my emotional needs accurately. That you can present my interests to other people as well as to myself when I'm in labor. That you're physically strong and capable and emotionally strong and capable. No matter what happens to me, you're not going anywhere, all right? You have information and knowledge that I don't have. And you can help me remember that I'm having a baby, okay? And that there were things that were important to me that I'm forgetting about because I'm in labor, okay? The defense system is ruled by catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine. What do you know about catecholamines and oxytocin in labor? Catecholamines cancel out oxytocin. Boom, 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 okay? So, but the thing is that the amygdala, the limbic system, is searching for threat, and it assesses threat in 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. You don't get a chance to talk yourself out of that. There's no idea about mind over brain. It doesn't work that way. But you expect the laboring person to make their mind control their brain all the time, especially when it comes to cervical checks. Just relax. Well, if this person has a pattern in their brain that says, no, this is going to set off threat, you can't talk yourself out of that, because that's a hard wire. That's a hard wire in the brain. And because Pitocin has been available since the 1950s, you don't think about protecting the natural labor, because you can always pit somebody. And because you can always pit somebody, the whole architecture of the hospital, the way it's designed, is not designed to protect spontaneous oxytocin flow. It's designed, in fact, to assault it. Okay? So what am I talking about? These are 18 ways to stimulate oxytocin in labor. I'll come back to that. So, yeah, I want to come back to that. When you have a history of trauma, that brain already has an overact defense system. And that brain is already searching for threats, especially among new stimuli. So if that person with a trauma history is in labor and is arriving at the hospital and they've never been there before, all of that novel stimuli is going to be encoded and interpreted as threat, okay, and is going to turn down that labor, okay. So in the limbic system of the brain, which is where labor takes place, it doesn't take place in the cerebral cortex. So we've got the hypothalamus creating oxytocin, the pituitary gland releasing it. The olfactory bulbs, the sensory input from the brain is heightened in order to make sure that the environment is secure, because if something doesn't smell right, it's not safe, that's going to cause the brain to go, okay, it's not safe to labor, we're going to stop laboring now. So the environment is important. The caudate nucleus is storing and processing memories, but it's also part of the reward system. And I haven't figured that part out about how the reward system is a part of this as well, because it's certainly important in other reward experiences. So anyway, the amygdala, as I said before, is searching for that threat, but it's also processing and storing memory. And long-term memories are easily accessed by environmental triggers. So are those positive memories or are those negative memories? We don't know. When it comes to birth memory research, all studies show that memories of the birth are lifelong. 20 years later, and I've talked to a lot of people in old folks' homes, find out what I do for a living, and are telling me their birth story 40, 50 years after having their babies. 20 years after the birth, women remember 90% or more of their original experience. Most of their memories are of you. And those memories, if they were positive ones, are becoming more positive over time. If they're negative, they're becoming more negative over time. And those memories affect their sense of self-worth and their agency in becoming a parent. So if it's a disempowering birth experience, they have a lot less confidence as a parent and in taking care of their child than if it was a positive experience. So this is something that I teach people in the first 2 hours of a 4-day doula training. Memories matter. And this is where we have influence with people when we're there with them at a birth. When we're moving from early to active labor, it's as if the brain is like, because labor starts between the baby's brain and the placenta. So it isn't really until early labor has started that the limbic system says, oh wait, really? You mean this? Okay, well then I'll start sending out some endorphins, and I'm going to send out some more oxytocin here. That's why the contractions change. You see the laboring person's behavior change. And the brain begins this repetitive behavior for self-soothing, which we call a coping ritual. So all people in spontaneous labor have a natural rhythm, whether that's a slow rhythm, oh, 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 or a fast rhythm, oh, 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 oh. But everybody has a natural rhythm. And this is what the brain does to soothe itself. It will find some behavior to repeat with each contraction. If they cannot do it, that leads to stress, pain, catecholamines, and people needing pain meds. Okay. So this is the challenge. You've got patient at home, healthy pregnancy, spontaneous labor, great oxytocin flow. So you give them what your 411, 311, 511 rules is when we want to see you. We know that catecholamines, anything that makes them afraid, anything that causes distress, anything that interrupts the flow of the labor is going to stimulate catecholamines, which is going to bring down oxytocin. Well, what's the first thing we do with this great labor at home? We put them in the car. Catecholamines. When they arrive at the hospital, here they have to interact with strangers. There's some interaction about getting in the wheelchair, not getting in the wheelchair. More catecholamines. When they finally arrive at triage, they're met by another stranger. More catecholamines. If you're in a teaching hospital, that means you have multiple examiners, multiple interactions, multiple people touching your body, more catecholamines. The savvy triage nurse knows that time is going to increase familiarity and that she can do some strategies to help reinforce that labor, okay? But then we keep it up. Another vaginal exam, IV, external fetal monitors, putting in a gown, answering questions, because we're shaking people out of their limbic system and into their cerebral cortex, okay? Changing rooms, changing floors, another wheelchair, another escort. A new nurse new vitals, answering more questions, more catecholamine. So by the time we get the person checked into the room, they have a much higher level of catecholamines, unless for some reason that brain feels safe. But if we have somebody who's new, if we have somebody who hasn't done this before, somebody who's in an unfamiliar environment, you're going to have lower oxytocin. So what is the labor support needs there? Reestablish the Cochrane ritual, familiarize the laboring brain with a new space, use oxytocin stimulating strategies. So if you look at this list, you can see there's a lot of things that you might put on a list to try and get a baby in instead of just trying to get a baby out. You think about the purposes of oxytocin, what makes oxytocin flow, it's the same no matter what the situation is, okay? So these are all things, we don't necessarily demonstrate nipple stimulation and genital stimulation in a doula training, but I do explain it to people, okay? So all of these things. So what's the key concept here? Oxytocin flow is necessary for progressing labor. It's linked to positive responses to attachment behaviors. When I feel vulnerable, I let people know when my needs are met. Catecholamines or stress hormones lower oxytocin levels. When I feel vulnerable, I need to protect myself. This activates the defense system, and the defense system prevails over the oxytocin-based attachment system. The more we soothe the patient and display genuine caring behaviors, the more likely it is that the oxytocin system will prevail and labor can progress. Does that make sense? So it comes back a lot to how people are treated, but also how the brain is perceiving what's happening in labor. So I'm going to give you a chance to discuss this with your neighbor. What do you think is the #1 factor in birth satisfaction? So I'm hoping to hear at least 5 different ideas. What do you think it might be? You. What do you think it might be? Doulas? Okay, somebody said doulas. Something else. What else? What do you think? Feeling supported. Okay. Good outcomes. Okay. Healthy baby. Yeah, that's what you'd hope that would be the #1 thing, because that's your priority, right? Right. Some people say low medication. Some people say less pain. Actually, it's involvement with decision making. The #1 factor, repeatedly, study after study after study after study of 26 years. Discussions about interventions are important to later well-being. This is the mnemonic I teach doulas. Brand. What are the benefits? First, is this an emergency, or do we have time to talk about it? That's what I tell them. This is what you should teach your clients to speak to their care providers about. What are the benefits? What are the risks? What are the alternatives? What if we do nothing and then make a decision? It's the #1 reason you don't like us. #1 reason obstetricians give in studies they don't like doulas. They interrupt the flow of what I'm doing and make me talk with my patients. All right? So, and feeling it's seen as a challenge to authority or expertise. But that's not what it's about. That's not what it's about at all. Because we know about the birth memory literature, and we know about the birth satisfaction literature. And we know that they're going to remember this for years, and this is going to structure how they interact with their kids, whether they feel a sense of agency in their life. So that's why we do it. And I have talked to 3 different malpractice attorneys in town, and they all say this is a great thing for obstetricians to do, because anytime you have a conversation, the nurse is going to chart it. So if you ever end up in a suit situation, they're going to review that, and they say, well, every time this patient had a question, Dr. X stopped and answered it. I don't know what they're talking about here. So it looks good for you when you do that. So if I could change something, this would be it. This would be it. That, oh, you want to talk about it? Great, let's talk about it. I know the system doesn't allow you time. I know that there's tremendous time pressure, but that's the part of the system that you guys have to change. You have to demand that. You can do your jobs better. I get to say that because I'm not a part of it, and I'm an outsider, and I listen to people all the time on the board of directors of Wisconsin Association for Perinatal Care. I've been doing this work for over 30 years, listening, observing, and I know that systems have to change. And they only change because the people inside the system are putting pressure on it, as well as the people who are participating in it from outside the system. And And you've certainly got that now. You've got patients and consumers that are saying, we need to change how things are done. You need to stop having burnout, okay? Because that's what happens to you when you don't have time to make connections with patients that patients want, and you're not able to give that humanistic care. I've been listening to people for a long time. Systems have to change to accommodate the humanity of the people who work in them. Okay, there's my spiel. Now I'll stop. So, working with the laboring brain, most patient care is actually cross-cultural because, are you familiar with this study? The Coley and Zapata study? Okay, so Jasmine Zapata and Cheryl Coley did this study a few years ago. It's done locally here. Patients and physicians agreed on the components of culturally appropriate care. But the physicians here in UW Health thought they were giving it, but that's not what the patients experienced, okay? So the takeaway was that there's a disconnect, there's room for improvement, and that means there's an opportunity to be curious. Rather than feeling criticized, approach it as an opportunity to be curious about how can we shift, what can we do differently. So when we look at the elements of a culture, medical anthropology is a whole study of the culture of medicine and where does that come from, and how do you view the world. And because of that, medical culture is based on white cultural values. So if you're a culturally white person, you never really think about medical culture because it's kind of like white culture on steroids, you know? When we're looking about it, these are white culture behaviors and other cultural behaviors. And I've highlighted the ones that are most conflict-ridden in the hospital system that I see occurring. A sense of urgency, there's only one answer, either-or thinking, and there's a lot of status orientation that keeps people from problem-solving together in groups. Conflict avoidance, whereas other cultures are happy to avoid conflict. They always feel that there's enough time. Emotional expression is important, and emotional restraint is what's very much valued in medical culture. So because of that, we have a built-in conflict, all right? Important. So the takeaway here is because of these differences in values, birthing in a hospital is a cross-cultural experience, all right? When your medical trained treating you is not from your ethnic or racial culture, that is a cross-cultural experience. It is cross-cultural for you, as well as the patient and the caregivers. And if you're culturally white, you probably never thought about it that way, especially if you're from Wisconsin. Because as somebody who came from a very multicultural environment in Northern California, moving here to Wisconsin, it was very, very strange for me. So, what is the well-trained and professional doula's role? Doulas are unique. They do not overlap with any other current role. They meet unique needs of the laboring patient and family. If there is no doula, those needs go unmet. Our job is to make your job easier, okay? We're cheaper and healthier than a lot of other often used interventions. And current reimbursement systems reward the use of those less healthy interventions, but not doula support at a living wage for us, okay? There's a maximum number of births you can go to in a month just because of the physical limitations. So if we're not making enough money in order to do that, it doesn't become viable work. The doulas I've trained know how to work with you, know how to work with the laboring brain, seeing medicine as a culture and themselves as cultural guides, prompt their clients to ask a lot of questions. They have respect for you. These are all different groups that I've trained. And if things get rough, we know that that trusting relationship between our client and their medical team is vital to their well-being. So we're going to encourage that as much as possible, okay? And this is from the Centro of Español Promotores. And what kind of power do we have? We don't have any power over you, over medical people at all. What we have power is to help people's voices to be heard, to connect them with the people they care about, to connect them with their care team, to help them with the hard physical work of laboring, to make sure that their cultural rituals are respected in the birth space, and help them process their birth, sometimes decades after it's happened to them, and help them make sense of who was I, and what happened to me. Okay, so thank you. So what questions do you have? So, Dr. Diem?
Yes, ma'am.
I went to one of my first births with you back in 1986. Do you remember what we looked like then? You have no idea. No idea, no. But I just did want to mention that. Was a woman having her urinary trial of labor. She had 2 previous VBACs, 2 previous cesareans. And so I remember that. Kathy, somebody or other. So, but she did that, and that was not something that was done often back then. So anyway, question? Yes.
Do you have any idea what percent of the births at America, for example, are attended by a doula?
No, nationally, according to the Listening to Mother survey, it's about 6%. So I would think it's probably something like that, 6 or 10. I don't know. I don't know the answer, but it would be fairly low. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say thank you. It was a really informative talk and really good overview of the importance that doulas can play. I think we have very good relationships as providers with our doulas in the community, and we do great work for our patients. Are you familiar with any efforts to kind of add doulas into the health system that have not been independent providers?
I know that the Harambe Village Doula program, run by Tia Murray and Michaela Berry, is they have a for-profit model for their group, and they're also getting grant money from public health and from a couple other resources. They're also working with Dr. Ryan McAdams and his study, so about breastfeeding outcomes and doulas. So as far as we have one agency here, but we don't have, whereas in the state of Illinois, the Answer Prevention Fund seeds and pays for doulas in all existing programs. So if you've got Early Head Start, you've got WIC, you've got the county health department, you've got our community, Nuestro, whatever, they all have doulas that are all paid for through the Answer Prevention Fund program. But we don't have that here in our state. We don't have any central group that's doing that. So, no, I do not know. I know that there's different models. The program at Columbia St. Mary's, before they were bought out by Ascension, was very favorable of doulas, but Ascension has not understood their value and so has dismantled that program. Yeah.
Again, thank you for a wonderful talk. For patients, what do you advise them as a sort of search for doula in their community? Online or word of mouth?
DoulaMatch.net is a free resource that gives a lot of information. All the doulas in there are profiled, and the more recently you've updated your profile, the more recently you're going to show up. But that is the best search service. We have a lot of different options, and anybody who's looking for a lower cost doula who's been recently trained and is willing to trade that off, well, if she's only been to 2 births but she charges me X number of dollars, that's fine with me. People usually email me about that. So since I've been training doulas here since 1997, I made a commitment at that time that I wanted whoever I trained to be able to get along with care providers, that was really, really important to me. So when you made that remark about we have really great relationships with our doulas, I'm going to take a claim for part of that. So I am, because I've been doing this since 97. I've trained over 1,500 people to be doulas in our state. So I'm gonna take a little bit of that back with me. Thank you. There was someone in a green shirt in the back who had your hand up.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered it. I was going to ask, how are there any movements to make being a doula in this community a more viable profession, so that our clients do have more choices for hiring them? I encourage our clients. I work in and out of hospital as a midwife, and if somebody asks a question before I can suggest that they do hire a doula, I always say yes, you should, especially in the hospital setting, because of lots of the reasons that you described, and the fact that we can't be there in such a busy practice with every attraction to support them, and we know that.
Well,
how do you make it more doable for those?
We need to have insurance reimbursement for doula support, and that comes from people who are already involved in the system saying this should happen, we want this to happen. So, and also for you as care providers, why don't you hire doulas in your practice as an OB? Why don't you have 6 doulas who work for you? I mean, then you can put them as part of your billing package, and then you're able to offer them a living wage, you're able to offer them health benefits, and then you're only working with 6 or 7 people, and you know them. You know their outlook, you have a working relationship with those doulas. There's lots of other physicians who have done that in other states, but I see that as really a win-win-win for everybody, because I don't see it as a compromise. People say, well, then you're just following through with the obesity. No. I said, as long as the obstetrician understands that what you're doing is valuing the labor and they get the research, then you're fine. You know, it's about trying to substitute the doula for all the other interventions that we know can have more negative downstream effects, whereas doulas do not. So I see it as a matter of getting good insurance reimbursement, because we don't have a reimbursable code. And even being part of the Medicaid package, like they just included in New Jersey, I didn't see the rates published. And that was the problem in Oregon, Minnesota, and New York, is that they have got Medicaid reimbursement, but at $40 a birth. $40 in Minnesota. They just raised that to like $400, but that's still not something in Madison you can live with. Oh, pardon me. Another question? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for your talks.
Thank you.
Speaking to the brand acronym for like the ideal way to communicate with physicians and patients, and then with the caveat that in an emergency situation you can't exactly.
Right. An emergency, it's like, no, we have to do something.
So in those situations, like what we as providers do to like try to be as informative as possible, and then what is your role
I think just as simple, this is an emergency, I'm going to do the best I can for you in this moment, okay? And we're going to do the best we can. And then you give that smile and that nod, and then you do what you got to do. And then it's the doula's role to offer the emotional support, continuing through that. And what I tell people, as I say, if you can't be at bedside for some reason, you choose a spot in the room and you get calm. That's your job. Your job is to be calm, because then you influence everybody else in the room to be calm. And isn't that what we want medical people to have? We want them to be calm when they're doing those life-saving things. So as doulas, we still have a role even when things get medical. And you know, it's like when people say, well, if I have a midwife, I don't need a doula. It's like, well, if something happens, you've still got, you know, the midwife's got 2 patients, and she can't do the emotional support for you, which is exactly when you need it, when there's some kind of a crisis. Yes?
Can I just say that even in an emergency, as healthcare providers, we can go through those super quick. You know, here's what I'm doing and why. Please, you know, this is why I would like to do this. Is it okay with you? I mean, it's so fast. So there's really nothing that we should be doing to someone without some explanation and involvement.
I would say that if I had to sum it up, I would say that 30 to 60 seconds of human connection, when you can make that with somebody, that's trauma prevention. Because it's feeling alone, isolated, helpless, and I am not seen as a person. And don't call somebody mommy, call them by their name. Okay? So that's something that for people who've had negative experiences that I hear a lot, and I'm processing them with them. So I didn't feel like I was treated like a person. They kept calling me mom instead of by my name. And even just that identification is a huge difference for people in what they're experiencing. And also, if they say no, stop, stop. Because that gets encoded as trauma. If you don't have control over what's happening to your own body, you know, and it's hard. It's just like, if I could just 30 more seconds, 45 more seconds, and I would be done here. I don't want to have to stop. But they need me to stop. So it's hard. I get that. But it's needed. Anything else? Thank you. Thank you very much.